Sadhunam vatmadashayan. Sadhunam vatmadashayam. Evam sanchintya Bhagavan. Swaraje stapya dharmajam. Nandayamasha surida. Sadhunam vatmadashayan.
Evam sanchintya Bhagavan. Evam sanchintya Bhagavan. Swaraje stapya dharmajam. Swaraje stapya dharmajam. Nandayamasha surida.
Thus, Sanchintya, thinking within himself, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Swaraje, in his own kingdom, Stapya, installing, Dhamajam, Maharaj Yudhishthira, Nandayamasha, gladdened, Suridha, the friends, Sadhunam, of the saints, Vatma, the path, Dashayan, by indicating. Translation. Lord Sri Krishna, thus thinking to himself, established Maharaj Yudhishthira in the position of supreme control of the world, in order to show the ideal of administration in the path of piety, on the path of piety. Do you repeat? No? Well, there's no purport, so I'll read on. Uttarayam dritapuro vangsa sadva bimanya yuna savai dronyastra sampluta purnar bhagavata dritaha. Translation. The embryo of Puru's descendant, begotten by the great hero Abhimanyu in the womb of Uttara, his wife, was burned by the weapon of the son of Drona. But later he was again protected by the Lord. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The embryonic body of Parikshit, which was in formation after Uttara's pregnancy by Abhimanyu, the great hero, was burned by the Brahmastra of Ashwatthama. But a second body was given by the Lord within the womb, and thus the descendant of Puru was saved. This incident is the direct proof that the body and the living entity, the spiritual spark, are different. When the living entity takes shelter in the womb of a woman through the injection of the semen of a man, there is an emulsification of the man's and woman's discharges, and thus a body is formed the size of a pea. Wow. Developing gradually into a complete body. But if the developing embryo is destroyed in some way or other, the living entity has to take shelter in another body or in the womb of another woman. The particular living entity who was selected to be the descendant of Maharaj Puru, or the Pandavas, was not an ordinary living entity, and by the superior will of the Lord, he was destined to be the successor of Maharaj Yudhishthira. Therefore, when Ashwatthama destroyed the embryo of Maharaj Parikshit, the Lord, by his own internal potency, entered into the womb of Uttara by his plenary portion, just to give audience to the would-be Maharaj Parikshit, who was in great danger. By his appearance within the womb, the Lord encouraged the child and gave him complete protection in a new body by his omnipotency. By his power of omnipresence, he was present both inside and outside of Uttara and other members of the Pandava family. Umagyanati mirandasya gyananjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam jena tasmai Shri Gurave namaha Shri Chaitanya manobishtam shtapitam jena bhutale swayam rupa kadamayam dadati swa padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savarutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna, Karuna Sindhu, Dina Bandhu, Jagatpate, Gopesha, Gopika, Kanta, Radha Kanta, Namostute, Tapta Kanchana, Gaurangi, Radhe, Vrindavaneshwari, Vrishabhanu Sute Devi, Pranamami Hari Priye, Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha, Kripa Sindhu Bevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschachadi Shatarane Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langa Yate Girim Jat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shri Gurun Dinatarinam. There's a quotation from Albert Einstein. Actually, he's a very interesting person, Albert Einstein. Says a lot of very interesting things. But this one is relevant very much to what we're talking about here today. He says there's two ways you can look at life. You can look on everything as if nothing is a miracle, or you can look on everything as a miracle. And this is something we need to be very aware of, because what's being described here is nothing short of a miracle. That his tiny little embryo pericket in the womb of his mother, and this weapon comes in and destroys his body. We have to remember that very importantly, that Parikshit Maharaj's body was destroyed. Annihilated. And there he was, stranded. Because if you're going to be in the material world, you have to have some kind of body. So he had no body. Suddenly he was without a body. Just think of that. Suddenly you're not in your body. Or suddenly your body vanishes, is destroyed, is just not there anymore. But you're still there. And you're stranded. So that's a horrendous situation to be in. We have to remember these things as they actually are when we read the Shastra. Just like we read how Mother Devaki gave birth to 6 children, and they were immediately taken away from her at birth and killed. We shouldn't gloss over that. What? They were what? What happened to her? Just think what she went through. Actually, it's unimaginable. It's unimaginable, this experience. And there are so many situations like that when we read the Shastra, that we can get blasé about things. Like, there's 8,400,000 species of life in the material world. What? 8,400,000 species? I think I talked about this here once before. You think about, anybody a millionaire here? I remember when I was at university, somebody published a book called 1 Million. And it was 1 million dots. Right? So you think, how many dots? Say 250 dots on a page. So 500 on either side of a page. What's 500 into a million? 2,000. 2,000. It was a 2,000-page book just for 1 million dots. 8,400,000 species. So we're talking four and a bit of books like that, a set of books like that, just listing the names. And when we think about it, we don't really know quite what that means when we say species. We have a sense from our education. I think there's this man called Linnaeus. I think he was Swedish. He was a monk. And he came up with this system of naming species. But he also had what was called a genus. So you'd have different species of dogs. But if you look at the Latin names of dogs, it starts with canis, canine, meaning dog. But then what kind of dog it is. So when the Shastra says 8,400,000 species, what does it really mean? Does it mean species of dog, or is dog a species and there's many, many varieties of that species? It's not certain. Prabhupada somewhere says form. But 8,400,000 different forms, if you take the idea of dog is a form, and then there's practically infinite varieties of forms of dogs, species of dogs or subspecies of dogs. So we really don't know what 8,400,000 species means, really. We really don't know what it means, but we take it for granted that we do, and we become kind of just becomes a part of our jargon. Oh, and by the way, Mother Devaki had 6 children, and they were taken away from her at birth and murdered. Moving right along. No, let's not move right along. Let's think about what's happening here. Parikshit Maharaj is in the womb, helpless, absolutely helpless. This is a very interesting point, isn't it? We see about human children. From the moment of conception, from the moment of conception till quite a way into life, we're completely helpless. Can't even stand up or feed yourself or do anything. You see a little horse, a little foal takes birth. It's just dropped on the ground in the paddock. If lucky, in a stable, just suddenly on the ground. And then within a little while, it's standing up. Within a very little while, it's standing up. Human child doesn't even begin to stand up till about a year old, or 9 months old. Completely helpless situation. What to speak of being in the womb? Completely helpless situation. So there's Parikshit in this completely helpless situation, and his body just gets annihilated in an instant. And there he is, stranded. But then something completely inconceivable happens. Krishna just appears there, in front of him. That's actually why Parikshit has the name Parikshit. You know that, don't you? Parikshit means the inspector, the observer. Parikshit had darshan of the Lord there, right instantly in the womb. And then the Lord gives him another body and then disappears. So for the rest of his life, everyone Parikshit met, he's looking at them very carefully. Is this the person I saw when I was in the womb? Is this the person who saved me? Is this the person? Is this? He would look very carefully at everyone. Because imagine that experience. Imagine how you'd feel. As I said, put yourself in his shoes. Put yourself in Parikshit's position. And just imagine. But actually, if we look a little deeper into Shastra, in the story of Paranjan, there's the description of how while in the womb, everyone has darshan of the Lord. Everyone has darshan of the Lord. And in that situation, in the womb, we all promise the Lord, you get me out of this, and I'll serve you. I'm yours. But then, of course, the material energy steps in. We take our birth, we come out bewildered, and we forget everything. And then immediately that happens, you're welcomed into your new family. Woo, here you are, little Billy, little Jenny. Stand up, talk, run around, be a boy, be a girl, be this, be that, be the other. You're this, you're that, you're the other. And it's all forgotten. It's all gone. Forgotten. But forgotten is a very interesting concept, isn't it? You can't forget something you don't know. Forgetfulness and remembrance are predicated on knowledge. Isn't it? If you don't know something, how are you going to remember it? If you don't know something, how are you going to forget it? It's not there. So this is a very, very, very important point that Lord Chaitanya makes to Sanatana Goswami. Your problem is you have forgotten Krishna. You have forgotten Krishna. What does that mean? It means you know Krishna. We all know Krishna. But we have forgotten Krishna. On the other hand, Vedaham samatitani vartamanani chajuna bhavishyani chabhutani mamtu vedana kaschana, Krishna says to Arjuna in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Which verse? Who knows? What number verse? Verse 26 of Bhagavad Gita. Vedaham samatitani vartamanani chajuna bhavishyani chabhutani mamtu vedana kaschana. I know everything. I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and everything that is yet to come. I know every living entity. Every living entity. Krishna knows every living entity. So there's two terms here, omnipotence and omnipresence. And you add to that omniscience. He knows everything. He knows everything. And he forgets nothing. He forgets nothing. So the important thing about that, as is being shown here in his dealing with Parikshit Maharaj, that we can take Hare Krishna, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai, that we can take very deeply into our own lives, is that Krishna knows you. Krishna is aware of you. Krishna has always been aware of you. And Krishna will always be aware of you. Whether you are aware of him or not. We talk about becoming Krishna conscious. So part and parcel of becoming Krishna conscious is to gather some understanding of Krishna's consciousness. And Krishna's consciousness is inconceivable because he's omnipresent, he's omnipotent, he's omniscient, eternally. There is no beginning to this, and there is no end to that. End to this. But omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotency are part and parcel of Krishna. And only Krishna. And only Krishna, no one else. That's another very important point we need to understand about Krishna. And Prabhupada puts it so beautifully. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Supreme means there's only one. There is only one. And it's not that he became the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead until somebody else knocks him off the perch. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead eternally. Never was there a time when he was not the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and never will there be a time when he is not the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as a result of that, or as a consequence of that, we see him here exhibiting omniscience and omnipotence and omnipotence in this situation. When Uttara comes running to Krishna saying, save my embryos, nobody else knows what's going on. Nobody knows what's happening. Only Krishna knows. That's why she comes to Krishna. She knows that only Krishna can help her. And that brings us back to helplessness, doesn't it? Because if we actually analyze the concept of helplessness in regard to everything in our lives, we're totally helpless. All the time. All the time. Totally dependent. Now, there's an apparent contradiction there because we are independent also. We are simultaneously independent and dependent. That's our situation. Krishna is supremely independent. He is not dependent on anything. Everything is dependent on him. But we are part and parcel of Krishna. Therefore, we have minute independence. There's a very nice sentence in the purport to the 15th verse of the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Prabhupada says, because he is a living entity, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. And we have misused our free will and desired to come to the material world. And therefore we are now completely under the control of the three modes of material nature. Tribhiya gunamaya bhavaya ebi sarvam idang jagat mohitam na vijanati mamebhya paramabhya. The whole world, deluded by the three modes of material nature, does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. Krishna never comes under the influence of the material energy. But we are completely under the control of the material energy as soon as we enter the material world. We are in the clutches of Maya. That's a very strong word, clutches. I've got you in my clutches. We use that term in cars, the clutch. What's the clutch mean? You press this pedal down, it's called the clutch. What does it mean? Anyone know how a gearbox works? It comes in, it grabs a hold of the gear that you want, or it doesn't actually. It comes in and enables you then to move the gear stick, or within an automatic transmission, to a point where you select the gear you want, and the clutch holds it, clutches it, and is very tight. That's why it's called the clutch, because it is so tight things don't shift. They stay where you want them to be. And that's why when your clutch is not working, your car pops out of gear. It slips. And then you suddenly, you got to turn. The clutch is not working. But Maya's clutch never stops working. She's got no manufacturing problem. She's got no inbuilt obsolescence. She doesn't wear out. Her clutches are complete, and we are completely dependent within the clutches of Maya. If you think you're not, hold your breath. Everybody, hold your breath. Just hold your breath. How long can you hold your breath? You can be dead in 2 minutes. If you're without air, you just die. So the most basic thing, just breathing, we are completely helpless. We are completely helpless. Just like Prabhupada, he used to use the example like you can have a stroke and you can't speak anymore, you can't do, so many things happen. So it's the mentality of the devotee that's exhibited here by Uttara. She's very aware of the danger she's in. Actually, Prabhupada said one time to the devotees, if you were aware of the danger you're in, you would be terrified. It is no joke. Again, we can't gloss over this. Shastra says there is danger at every step. At every step. And we become blasé about that. Oh yeah, there's danger at every step. That means every step you take. At every step you take, there is danger in this material world. That is the nature of the place. And it doesn't change because you're in the clutches of Maya. So the growing awareness of dependency on Krishna is a very important thing to cultivate. Cultivate a growing awareness of how you're completely dependent upon Krishna. Is there an echo in here? Playing back. How long do we go for? Jai Shri Radha Gopinath ki jai. So going back to Mr. Einstein, either you see things that are happening and there's no miracle here, or you see that actually there's a miracle, everything is a miracle. How is it all happening? And the problem that you can come up against is in education is what is called rationalism. There's a rational explanation for this. Well, you can rationalize it. But one of the biggest problems in the world today is there's no real in-depth philosophy. There's no real in-depth understanding of anything. But everyone accepts that there is a causeless cause of all causes. Now, we live in a very grossly materialistic age, and so-called scientists are trying to tell us that everything comes about as a result of the interaction of material elements. And if you ask, well, where does the material elements come from? And they say, well, there's nothing beyond this. There just is matter. Matter just is. There's nothing causes matter to exist. There's nothing beyond matter. So straight away, they have a philosophy of what is the causeless cause of all causes. Now here, this situation, Parikit's in the womb, and Ashvatthama, he throws the Brahmastra. So on the surface of it, there's just this energy coming towards her. But where does this energy come from? And this is the thing where people say, oh, God's just energy. God's just energy. It is just energy. But who are you that are saying It's just energy. What brought you into existence? What combination of energies created you, the conscious entity, who's saying it's just energy? Where do you come from? Where do you come from? Oh, well, it's just material elements. It's just the mind. It's just the brain. Consciousness is just a product of the brain. But actually, there's all kinds of research that's gone on where people are conscious and functioning, but they do a brain scan and practically their brain is just a bag of water. But they have no answer to that. Well, why? How can you go on functioning as a conscious entity if practically your brain doesn't exist? They have no answer. But an intelligent person wants to know, well, yeah, there's got to be more than just the interaction of these chemicals. There's got to be a little bit more going on here than just that. And well, where does it come from? And then you get all kinds of ridiculous, well, it actually comes from nothing. I think I said this here once before. I read in a school book about science where it said scientists believe, do they? Straight away they said, well, that's just your belief, all this religious stuff. That's just your belief. But then you read in the science journal, scientists now believe, on the basis of prevailing evidence, that under certain circumstances, something can come from nothing. Well, where did the circumstances come from that brought something out of nothing? As soon as you say circumstances, you've got something. It's nonsense. Any child will tell you, you can't get something from nothing. Nothing means no thing. So how can a thing come from no thing? It's not logical. There's no logic in that. So it must come from somewhere. Things must come from somewhere. And here we see. What is happening here? When a living entity takes shelter in the womb of a woman through the injection of the semen of a man. So there's the substance called semen, and there's a substance called ova. And the living entity enters that. Well, first of all, the living entity enters the semen. Without the living entity present, these things don't happen. That was something that made Prabhupada very, very proud of his disciple Hansaduta, who challenged the doctor in Sri Lanka that you take the elements of an egg, the chemical elements of an egg, and you put it in a nice little container and you put it in an incubator and produce a chicken. You take the elements that make up the body of any creature, you take the elements of that body, you combine them together in that proportion within a humidor situation and produce a body. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. So there's obviously, logically, straight away, something else there. Something else there. The difficulty is science is based upon the concept of measurement. How do you measure everything? What's the metric on this? Like you go and get a blood test, right? And then all the things that they want tested in your blood come back to the doctor with different figures against them. Now he's been trained up to know that within this range and that range it's good, below and above that range there's problems. So he has a metric on it. And at a glance you say, oh, your liver's not in good shape, oh, your kidneys, oh, you need this, you need that. Because it's been measured. But then we're presented with the idea of the living entity being 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair. You think about that. How do you measure that? How do you measure that? Because how fine a tip is there on the tip of a hair? Where do you get to the point where you say, in a like what they call a vanishing point situation? Where do you get to the point where you can say we're at the tip of the hair? Because in modern science, you can measure it more and more and more and more and more finely. And actually, that's the point about saying that the living entity is 1/10,000th the size of a tip of a hair, because it's immeasurable. You cannot measure that. And we see now, in modern science, there's all kinds of tools for measuring subatomic particles. And they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller in their measurement. But every time they get to a level, they think, well, this is the smallest thing. Then somebody says, well, no, there's something smaller. It's just like there was a competition in the 19th century between German watchmakers and Swiss watchmakers. And so the Germans produced a wire to be used in watchmaking that you could only use if you were looking through a microscope, because you couldn't see it any other way. And they thought, we've done it. We've produced something. This is the finest wire we can make. And they sent it off to a Swiss watchmaking company for bragging rights. See what we've done. Top that. So the Swiss bought it out and sent it back. They made this tiny little wire that you could not see unless you looked through a microscope. They made it into a tube. In order to make, you got the physics of that? Yeah? In order to bore something out, you've got to put something smaller than the circumference of it. So there's no end to this. There's no end to how small you will be able to measure things materially. And the living entity is beyond that measurement. Beyond and beyond and beyond and beyond. There is no way these things can be measured. But without the presence of this living entity, matter is dead. Dead. We need to contemplate these things. You need to contemplate this. Give yourself a bit of time for Prabhupada says, for contemplation and realization. Realization. It's a very interesting word, isn't it? Realize. Just like modernize. We're modernizing the temple right now, aren't we? We're modernizing it. What does it mean to modernize something? What we have is outdated, not functioning properly. It has to be regenerated, rearranged, redeveloped. So what does it mean to realize? It means you're in a state of unreality. That's what it means. What does Bhagavatam say? The beginning of Bhagavatam. This material world appears real, even to great sages and demigods, but it is unreal. It is unreal. It is unreal, like a statue is not a man. It is a representation of a man, but it is not alive. It is not real. It is unreal. Like a $5 note or a counterfeit $5 note. Who can tell the difference? Only a very well-trained eye can say, oh yeah, this is a counterfeit. And we do not have trained eyes anymore. Our eyes are covered. All we can see is matter. All we can see is material things. And actually, and like you can't even see all of that. You can't even see the wind. You can't even see the air that you breathe. You can't see the wind blowing through the air unless you see the tree moving by the effect. You can't see the soul. You can't see the soul except by the process that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita. Raja Vidya, Raja Guyam, Pavitrangitam Uttamam, Pratyaksha Dharmyam, Susakam Katam Avyayam. Pratyaksha, who knows what Pratyaksha means? Direct perception. Aksha means eyes. Pratyaksha means you develop the eyes to see something that you're not seeing now. Direct perception of the self. How? What does the translation say? This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the perfection of Dharma because it gives direct perception of the self by realization. Realization. This was something Maharaj was talking about last night. Get real. Let's get real about things. What's the reality of what's going on here? The reality of what's going on here is we are completely under the control of the three modes of material nature, but we do not belong here. And we are not a product of the three modes of material nature. And neither is Krishna. Always go back to the basics. Understand the basics. Threadbare. Anybody here a mathematician? Anybody got a degree in maths? Anybody study mathematics to the end of high school? Yes? You remember Newtonian calculus? No? You can look this up. In Newtonian calculus, there are six first principles. And the first of the six principles is matter cannot be created or destroyed. But anyway, in order to... these principles have a mathematical equation. And Newton worked out that all kinds of problems in mathematics and understanding of motion and so forth could be worked out by applying one or more of these formula to the problem. First principles. So when you went to the exam, you'd have a calculus problem presented to you, and it would say, by reference to first principles, solve this problem. So these first principles, again, we can take it all for granted. Like people think, well, if he says I'm not this body one more time, I'm going to scream. I know that. Or do you know that? Have you realized that? Or do you forget it every single day? How many times a day? We are very deeply immersed in unreality. We are very deeply immersed and have been very deeply immersed in unreality for a very long time. There's an interesting point the other night in Erskineville. Who was at the Erskineville program? Yes. At the end of the question and answer session, Apurva Madhuri asked Maharaj, what role does grace play in all of this? In all of the understanding of this philosophy? Grace. What is grace? And Maharaj gave a very interesting answer. He said, actually, we should not be here talking about this. In the Kali Yuga, it's not on. This is not meant to happen in the Kali Yuga. This discussion, this process of realization, it's gone. Kali Yuga is the iron age of hypocrisy and quarrel, of total materialism. And we see it's moving very quickly. And this Sangha, this Sadhu Sangha, is not meant to happen in the Kali Yuga. It is only by the grace of the Lord that it is happening. So we need time. We need to give ourselves time to contemplate this. Sit and contemplate what you're hearing and what you're learning. It's not just a body of information that you have to ingest into what do they say? Cram it in so that you can pass an exam. Quite often when I get asked to give a talk, people say, "What's going to be the topic of your talk?" And I say, there's more to it than standing first in the Bhakti Shastri. Anybody can read a book and memorize what's in that book and answer questions about it. But do you really know what you're talking about? Do you really know it? By realization, you really know it? No, you don't just by that. You have to apply it to yourself. This is the first point. Krishna says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you. And what do we know from the Acharyas? That this wonderful conversation that goes on between Arjuna and Krishna is that Krishna is speaking to you through what he is saying to Arjuna. As soon as you read that, when Krishna says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, he means you. You, the reader of this book. You, the person who is holding this book in your hand, reading those words off that page. You have always existed, and you will always exist. There was never a time when you did not exist, and there will never be a time when you cease to exist. Nothing can kill you, except, of course, Krishna. But he would never do that. He would never annihilate you, because you are part and parcel of him. That's another very easily forgotten or glossed over, jargonized phrase. Oh yeah, we're all part and parcel of Krishna. What? What am I? I am part and parcel of Krishna. Part and parcel of Krishna. Wow. Wow. And Prabhupada was always at great pains to stress, and you have a very intimate relationship with Krishna. The relationship with Krishna is very intimate and personal. Just like they have the term, I don't know if it's around now, but when I was younger, there was the term up close and personal. Up close and in your face. In your face. These things are facts, but they are not facts that one can easily understand just by reading those statements. There has to be application. There has to be application on a daily basis. There has to be conscious entry into the process of realizing these things through the application of these principles in daily life. Like Krishna says, Chetasa Savakamani, Mai Sanyasyamatpara. In all activities, just depend upon me. What do you mean all activities? From the moment you open your eyes in the morning, from the moment that alarm goes off and you open your eyes and wish you could just roll over and go back to sleep, to the moment when you put your head down at the end of the day and say, I'm going to sleep again. And then even through your sleep. Just depend on Krishna. Why? Because you are dependent on Krishna for everything. We are totally dependent on Krishna. It's very important to be mindful of this. This is another great term, isn't it now? Mindfulness. What am I supposed to be mindful of? Be mindful of this. Be mindful of this reality. This immutable reality. It's not a relative reality. It is an absolute reality. It does not change. That's the meaning of absolute. It does not change. Our dependence upon Krishna is total and eternal. There's the only idea that we're somehow or another independent is as a result of the illusory energy. Is a result of the influence of the illusory energy of the Lord, which we wanted to come under the influence of. But the problem is, this is a temporary place full of misery, and you can't change it, you can't fix it. And the more you try to fix it, the worse it gets. The more, Prabhupada says, we become more and more and more entangled in the complexities of Maya. The complexities. We live in it, like anyone who's been around more than 40 years knows the world is very complex now. If you've been around 60, 70 years in this life, you know the world is very, very much more complex than it used to be. And if you were lucky enough to have a grandparent who was born sometime in the late 19th century, what they had to tell you about what life was like in their youth just is, what? You didn't have electricity? You didn't have electricity? Now you just think of that one. You take electricity out of the equation of the world right now. There's a TV, I don't know if it's on TV now, but I saw in England they had a thing where they would take a family to a house, a contemporary family, like this was, I saw a program like this way back in the 1980s. So they took a family from suburban London, living in a house in suburban London, circa 1984, and they took them out to a shepherd's shack in Scotland with no running water, no electricity, none of these things. And in other episodes, they